from the beginning. The Russians have talked about things like denazification. That has to happen. They're not kidding. They're talking about these people who have run around and committed terrible atrocities, particularly in Bucha, which we've talked about previously, and other places, murdering civilians, murdering soldiers. They murdered people in the Kursk Oblast. That's unacceptable. That particular element in the Ukrainian government has to go away. The problem for the Ukrainian people is, how can they make an impact when they're faced or confronted with the secret police showing up at their door and killing them? So it's a very difficult problem. The second thing is they talked about neutrality. That's not up for discussion. There will be no membership in NATO, yet you continue to hear that nonsense from Zelensky and others in Europe, that, well, they're a sovereign state. They have the right to do whatever they want. Well, in theory, we all have sovereignty and we can all do things, but none of us can do whatever we want. We cannot do whatever we want. We live with other people on the planet. The Ukrainians live next to Russia. The Ukrainians live next to Poland and Romania and the Baltic states. They can't do whatever they want. All of us are constrained in some fashion if we want to live in peace with our neighbors. Right. That's all nonsense. And I think the point is that in those oblasts in the east, where people have voted themselves into Russia, that stands. And as far as I can tell, those votes were by no means illegal. They were very fairly carried out, and people went out of their way in the middle of a war to go out and cast their votes, and they were not casting votes at gunpoint. So that's nonsense. The same thing was true in the Crimea. Those places are going to remain part of Russia. Now, if you're going to go in there and take the position that all of that's up for discussion, your negotiations aren't going to go anywhere. And we don't know, but I suspect that negotiations are going to break down over these conditions. And as the other point of this is, you cannot expect a ceasefire as long as you're convinced that the NATO states and the United States will continue to supply military equipment and support to Kiev. So at the end of the day in Russia, they look at this and they see no real rays of hope whatsoever. If we stopped supplying the Ukrainians, which is something we should have done months ago, if we said we're stopping this, and if you don't negotiate, there will be no resumption under any circumstances of any aid. But for the moment, we're stopping it until you do a sit down and agree to talk to the Russians. If we did that, I think that might have an impact. But we're not willing to do that. We're not taking the whole matter seriously. And indeed, we fixed it so that we are not being taken seriously anymore.
Yeah, and that is one of the big underlying problems. Martha Raddatz also asked Dmitry Peskov the difference between being willing to have an unconditional 30-day ceasefire and negotiating an end-to-war deal to end the fighting. And he said this.
Ukraine is trying to escape from negotiations.
Ukraine says they're ready for a ceasefire right now, a 30-day ceasefire.
But they're not ready for immediate negotiations. Ceasefire was supported by President Putin, but he asked several questions. He said that right now we have a certain dynamics on the fronts. Russian troops are advancing, and advancing in quite a confident way. So if we speak about ceasefire, what are we going to do with shipments of weapons coming every day from the United States and from European countries?
So you want those weapons stopped?
Well, if we do a temporary ceasefire,
you want the weapons stopped.
Otherwise, it will be advantage for Ukraine.
Yeah, you saw her face like smile like, ha, you want to stop the weapons during a ceasefire. And he's like, why would it be any other way? I mean, that really just kind of speaks to what you said a second ago from the Russian side.
Well, Martha Raddatz is another neocon. Come on, let's be frank. She's not there with an objective purpose in mind. She's there to promote the conflict on behalf of Zelensky and his neocon supporters. It's a waste of time. He's being very polite, and my hat is off to him for having handled it as well as he did. But he's essentially correct. You started this entire discussion by talking about 524 drones and missiles. many of which were supplied by the United States as well as other countries, as well as the things that the Ukrainians were able to build themselves. All of them, thankfully, were shot down so that the 9 May celebrations were not interrupted. But the point is, under what circumstances should anyone in Moscow take us seriously? Right after that, it's absurd. It's nonsensical. And then we have the president of the United States who is signing on for this nonsense that the globalist leaders of Western Europe want to do in order to sustain and promote the conflict. He's got to get it through his head that they are not his friends. They are not his allies. They are globalists. That's where it is. He can either do business with them or he can cut them off and say, we're out because we don't want a war with Russia. We're not supporting this anymore. He understands that, but he's failed to do it repeatedly.
Well, and here's part of the problem in terms of what the president does and doesn't get. And Gary, this is going to be another little bit out of order, but I want to jump down to Republican member of Congress McCaul, who is going to talk about what he sees. This is also over the weekend, where he's going to talk about that. It sounds to me like he is actually in agreement with the European leaders. And again, he's from the president's own party, but notice how he talks about the centrality of a ceasefire first.
There was a 30-day ceasefire called for. Mr. Putin decided to bomb Ukraine on Palm Sunday. He's not making any concessions at all, while Zelensky seems to be making all the concessions. So if the bottom line is Putin has to agree to a 30-day ceasefire for any peace talks to go forward. And the land that he is asking for is, that even J.D. Vance talked about this, and the president, land that Russia has not even occupied in Ukraine. So he has to operate in good faith. We want peace, but not peace at any price.
Well, that's like, no, I don't care what the reality is. I don't want to do this, so we just won't. But I mean, where can this kind of thinking lead to on the actual battlefield?
Destruction, the complete annihilation of the Ukrainian military, and ultimately the extinction of the Ukrainian government. Look, McCaul doesn't know what he's talking about. Look up the people that donate to McCaul's campaigns, where his money comes from. That'll answer most of your questions about why he says what he does. The man knows nothing, absolutely nothing about Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, or anything else. That's true for most people on the Hill. So he's a perfect example of ignorance and arrogance. He's reading talking points that are handed to him by people that are telling him, this is what we want you to say because we're donating to your campaign. You have in both parties some independent elements. You have an example with Bernie Sanders. You have an example on the other side with Rand Paul. But overwhelmingly, these people are members of the Uniparty. There's no longer any clear distinction between Republicans and Democrats as we once imagined them. These people are all being paid by more or less the same groups of people to say and do what they want. And that's what they're going to do. And the people that are making these decisions on the Hill, they know nothing about these things. They don't understand the history, the culture, the geography, the interests, and they don't care. It's not important to them. I mean, just imagine this fanciful answer, we're not going to sign on for peace at any price. Well, suit up, my friend, get a rifle. We'll drop you off on the front lines there in Ukraine, and you can, put your views to the test. You can demonstrate your great spine and character and commitment. It's not going to happen. These people don't have any. They're doing what they're doing for reasons that make absolutely no sense. But it does make a lot of sense if you're sitting in their chair and you're watching your campaign re-election funds fill up with millions of dollars from the people that want you to do these things. So, listening to these people on the Hill these days is deeply depressing. There is no light, it would appear, at the end of the tunnel.
So in the last few minutes we have here, I wonder if you can kind of give me your best military assessment from what's going to happen on the ground, especially from the Ukraine side. So we see the globalists that you talked about there, the European leaders. We see Zelensky. We even see some American politicians, and Trump seems to be kind of all over the map. But when you get down to it, the arena itself on the ground, the Ukrainian soldiers who have been suffering egregious, almost certainly well over 1 million deaths. I don't even know how many total casualties, and they're just continuing to throw them into the meat grinder. How much longer do you think that they can continue fighting in a coherent way that is still quite put up a robust defense that has slowed or that keeps the Russian offensives as a slow? But how much longer will they keep going down this path to where they just throw their lives away for something they see can't work on the battlefield?
Well, first of all, I don't think they've succeeded in slowing the Russians. I think the Russians have moved very deliberately with the goal of avoiding unnecessary casualties on their side. As I've said many times to people, President Putin is the first Russian leader in a very long time that was concerned about losses. You go back and read Zhukov's memoirs, the memoirs of some of the other generals that served under him, the point they make over and over and over again is that no one could dare mention losses to Stalin. If you mention losses to Stalin, you risk being eliminated, being fired. Stalin didn't care. That's why the true figures are not 27 million. They're closer to 39 and 40 million in terms of dead. That's the tragedy of the Second World War. But I think Putin has made it very clear he's not prepared to take those. Now, he enjoys overwhelming superiority in firepower, mobility in every case. The ground is hardened now. It's no longer as swampy and messy as it was all the way through March and April. He can launch a major offensive if he wants to. He can strike a hammer blow whenever he chooses to do so. There are still little holdouts of people in the vast forests and woods that they're essentially ankle biters in a strategic sense, but they too are slowly but surely being eliminated. But he can strike, and he can strike decisively if he chooses to do so. I think he would rather see a negotiated end of the conflict. So he's going to give this another try. Will this amount to anything, or will it end up as you and I have just discussed? I don't know. But I think his view is, let's give this one more shot, and then I'm done with this. And I think you will see they will roll up the territory to the Dnieper, and at some point a decision will be made to probably cross further north on the Dnieper, and then move south to secure Odessa. And the reason for that is that Odessa is the principal entry point for much of the arms and equipment that are being shipped into Ukraine. And then he will also move on Kiev. He has to, and extinguish this regime. Those are the things that are on the table right now. They have the capability, they can do it. Whatever these nonsensical armchair generals in the United States tell you, they can do it. But he hasn't wanted to. He still doesn't want to. But he will act if there is no alternative.